Okay, I think we're good to go while you're doing that cross posting. Nice to I love surprises, Ledger, you know that. Especially when it concerns my good friends. So thanks for jumping on.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, looks like everything works.
Well, I'm recording you, sir.
Oh,
I might stream this in a minute. I haven't gotten to that part. I had to run to my setup.
I'm nervous already. Yeah, let me know when you're fully.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, you good?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm
awesome.
just gonna press some buttons here in a second, but
Sure,
it's
sure. Um, Great. Well, both of us are brought to you by Blockfolio, or at least some portion of Ledger's shows. I know. Technical Roundup, certainly. Mobile trading app. Don't get liquidated on leverage. Probably the most intuitive crypto experience for non-crypto natives when it comes to exchanges and wallets and all that. I don't know if I told you, Ledger. I've been as sort of birthday gifts, wedding, anniversary stuff, whatever for my sister. I'm just gonna be sending her shit coins in perpetuity as presents, and then they'll either end up being the worst presents ever, and I'm like the worst brother in the world, or it's gonna be incredible. So far, I've sent her FTT and Solana. I don't know whether I'll diversify beyond that. I think the rule I've set myself is anything except Bitcoin and Ethereum uh, she'll be the recipient of. So that'll certainly be an interesting experiment for the years to come. But yeah, Blockfolio, mobile trading, asset swaps, no leverage, so you can actually keep your crypto without trading things you don't understand. No 20x cross margin defaults, as we've discussed previously on the on another
Wait.
show. But yeah, thank you to Blockfolio. And yeah, we've got a bit of a casual Friday. The duck is, at least on my side, a casual Friday. The duck is away, so the universe is united as victims, or perhaps beneficiaries of circumstance. Myself and my good friend Ledger Status, going all the way back to Ichimoku Cloud 2017 discussions, the good old days, as we know them affectionately.
Cred DMing me and saying, "How does the cloud work?" And me saying, "I don't know. I asked Josh about this about 4 months ago."
No, it was even better. My whole thing was, okay, I know how the cloud works, but we're so far away from it on Bitcoin. What's going on? I can't use this tool. We seem to be light years away from where the cloud would ordinarily be. So that was a bit of a reckoning.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you today, buddy.
No, thank you. Thank you for making the time. It's always fun.
Yeah.
So what do you think? I always start with some broad market overview stuff, Bitcoin, Ethereum majors, take a look at futures data, kind of see what's up. But the format is very amenable given the Friday context. But I don't want to overly casualize your show either. So feel free to set the tone.
No, no need, no big deal. I'm probably gonna just record an intro and then I'll post this later and put us in the middle of it. So,
Excellent.
um, in terms of what do I think and where we're at in the market,
Sure. Why not?
I think we're trying to, Bitcoin's like really working hard to reverse itself and either have sustained chop or have a markup cycle and make up some progress that ETH has had against it. I don't see anything that's like particularly unhealthy. We had a perfectly sized, perfectly reasonable correction, moderate even, you could say. What was it? Top to bottom,
Just
20,
under 30? Yeah.
yeah, 27, 28%, wick to wick. And that puts us historically in bull markets, gives us the ability to continue on with the fun. We haven't made new highs or anything like that. Weekly close, 60K, 60, yeah, right, just above 60K would be necessary. Of course, we could like blast through that early in this upcoming weekly, and like you don't exactly enter on that weekly level, but you might, as you've talked about many times, Cred, you can apply the weekly level to your intraday or intra-week trading
For sure.
and still treat it as a point of resistance turn support within that weekly bar. If someone was trying to identify opportunities for reentry, but I think what we're seeing more is like people just identifying where is outperformance, and ETH has really controlled that narrative. And then the part that I've been surprised by is I thought ETH was going to not only control that versus Bitcoin, but I thought actually DeFi would lag a little more than it has. And DeFi has been pretty strong in the face of an Ethereum bid. And I'm very curious to see if that'll fade, or if like the ETH move will slow as more money goes to DeFi, or if money, like the DeFi side of things, stays relatively flat and ETH on a relative basis to DeFi really starts to trend strongly. Because so far, like the ETH move and the DeFi move have been somewhat hand in hand, don't you think?
Yeah, that's been an interesting correlation to watch. I think just the way market structures developed is really positive. Like, you don't need to hold a view on everything in order to just take positions. Like, for example, someone can be in full whatever USD collateral and then express views on DeFi without having to get the extra directional risk from like trading it against the ETH pair or whatever, right? Like, if you think something's bullish, you can buy it and not have to worry about the rest of your portfolio, which sounds really self-evident. But you know, back in the day, if you will, in sort of altcoin Bitcoin land, the actual pair you were trading was like one of the last things you were worrying about, right? And you're always worried about the market more broadly and whether the environment was one that would be sort of facilitative of altcoin action, or you know, Bitcoin sneezes and my portfolio goes to doom, etc. I'm just pretty pleased to see that dispersion, to borrow from the block tower guys. So yeah, I'm not really, you know what, I haven't paid a ton of attention to the rotation, if there is one, sort of ETH DeFi. I know a lot of stuff's been green. My focus has been on, so I've been kind of caught off guard by how far ETH has traveled, despite Bitcoin kind of being on the ropes for a lot of that. I thought it would kind of get a bit more stuck, given it had like an all-time high breakout attempt, and then that's when Bitcoin had one of its biggest legs down, and the whole market kind of just paused as a result. But ETH is it's run like 30% higher or thereabouts since that sort of breakout, while Bitcoin still isn't hugely clear, at least in the higher time frames. So for me personally, I'm like, I want to get a really clear view on Bitcoin and then just mash the green button on just about everything. And I'm getting pretty close to that in terms of where Bitcoin is, but I guess I'm just on the very conservative side of things when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think that sounds fairly conservative because, we've seen strength despite Bitcoin. You could call it weakness. I think like it was pretty severely, depressed. At the same time, ETH was quite strong. So I think that alone like has really made for an interesting trade. Because if you just were looking at that Bitcoin chart, there were days there until like today's. I think it's question is today like some kind of stick save basically, right, for the monthly. Because the daily chart looked pretty garbage.
Yes.
So it's not like trying to be, rude about it, but it wasn't looking very good. So if it's more than a stick save, if it's continuation, like it just gives us a lot of leeway, right? We've only had there's been 2 up days, 3 side days since we bottomed in Bitcoin, and we're still well within the realm of chop. A lot of times, though, Bitcoin doesn't like to just continue to chop. Like once it bottoms, it tends to just go, right? That's what it did at the end of January. It bottomed, it had that reversal, but then it didn't like just keep consolidating until March or something. It just freaking impulsed up because Tesla bought.
I constantly rant about this when I get the chat with the duck. And there's this like prevailing narrative that Bitcoin will go sideways and we'll have like alt season, and people tend to develop that view at really key market inflection points where it really doesn't make sense for price to consolidate, and they find like one period of time when we had that close S&P 500 correlation where price just went sideways. I don't think even altcoins performed that well in that period, and they kind of fixate on that as, okay, Bitcoin just chop, I can ignore it and I can just go trade altcoins. And it's just curious that always tends to happen at inflection points. I kind of agree with you. I don't think the market's set up to keep chopping forever, especially now, like on the weekly time frame. I'm just going to open up a chart real quick. We're back at the top of the range, right? That's not like for me at least, it's not an area where I expect the market to slow down necessarily. It's more or less a decision point. Like it's sort of this 58k range high. Market tried to break above it, no dice. Broke down, arguably broke market structure, depending on how you define it. And now we're back at the retest level, at least on a weekly basis. Retraced the final leg down, if you will. When I look at these weekly range extremes, but sort of by definition, at least for me in my system, the extremes are not where I get comfortable or complacent or whatever in terms of volatility. These decision points is, they are where I want to focus on the market more than anything. And I suppose the cursory summary of that would be any high time frame strength, ideally weekly close, through 58k or thereabouts. Just like you'll know strength when you see it on this weekly candle. I think lights out for bears at that point. I expect a big breakout in Bitcoin and for that to actually catch up and make up for a lot of Ethereum ground. So that'd be Bitcoin up, ETH BTC down. If that weekly close happens that way. But I agree with you, like right into this area, I think kind of consolidation is the last thing I have on my mind when it comes to decision points,
It's hard to believe it's been this many weeks with hardly a new high, right? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 weeks.
Yeah.
Like since we really made the impulse high. Like we made 2 garbage higher highs. But those were just pure weakness. And February 15th was quite a while ago now. It's hard for me to put in my head that it's gone that fast. At the same time, it's about like when alt season. Yet if you look at Bitcoin dominance, I know it's not perfect. Yada yada yada. Who cares? This is definitely alt season level dominance.
If you want to share anything, by the way, feel free to natively.
Yeah, I gotta figure out how to do that.
Yeah, no worries. I'll bring it up if you want in the meantime. Yeah,
I think I can present
BTC.
A window. Oh boy, can't share my screen. An error occurred.
That's market cap dominance.
Yeah, I'm just looking at BTC.D on TradingView.
Yeah, I think I got it.
And it's like that's just a total meltdown, And yes. I think this thing's flawed. It's got stable coins built into it, maybe, and some other stuff like that. But whatever. The point is, at the friggin' January 1st, it was around 72. Mm-hmm. Today, it's 49.
Yeah.
Like, if you haven't made money in alts in that time period, I'm sorry, but you're not going to make it. Like, that's a 30% drop in dominance.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that would surprise me about going back up and retesting the prior levels from August that it broke down to. Mm-hmm. So like when DeFi summer ended, Bitcoin dominance stopped tanking and went from 58 to 72. Yep. Well, if it went back to and hit that as a ceiling, that's a 17% gain in dominance now.
Yeah.
That's the type of thing that could come from Bitcoin pushing up on this new weekly, stopping the consolidation, continuing the trend, goes to 80K while all our other stuff stays flat. I think that could catch quite a few of us off sides, including myself, especially when I'm slamming the ETH bullhorn constantly. You know what I mean? The
underexposed to Bitcoin meme is a great meme, but it's also very real a lot of the time, especially when we see the impact that those really big corporate purchases have had just on Bitcoin generally. I know Tesla is the outlier in that regard. I think even, Cobain made the same point. Some billionaire or corporation comes in, buys a ton, and ETH BTC can just get slammed. Especially if Bitcoin then looks like in relative terms, like a more attractive play, or it's got that kind of catch-up play, plus a catalyst to go with it. That certainly paves the way for dominance to move, I think, in the way you described.
Yeah, and I wonder how many of us are accounting for the potential catalyst. But you add a catalyst to this recovery that it's had.
Right.
I mean, that could be something. One of my favorite trades. It obviously doesn't work all the time. Your Google Meet won't let me share screens, so I apologize for that.
That's very rude.
But I'm just looking at Bitcoin with a 20-day moving average on it,
mm-hmm.
and in a way, I'm kind of thrilled if you end up putting a moving average on a CryptoCred chart.
just a standard.
It's
SMA,
right? It's like a personal accomplishment. I'm getting Fred to put a moving average on his chart. But I like to use it just as a theme, right, of kind of recapturing the trend.
Did you say 20 daily? Sorry.
Yeah, 20-day. It's also the mid-band of Bollinger Bands.
Yeah.
The middle line of Bollinger Bands.
Sure.
So it's kind of a dually interesting level. So you can see it doesn't always work, but sometimes like it'll flip that line, use it as support, and off you go historically. Like that one on the left of your screen in February is kind of like the premier type of example. It fails it, and then like as it recaptures, it's like, a really nice impulse. And you're able to get in on that type of low, fast moving average before it's made new highs. So you're not in because of the Tesla candle. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like where you're hella late to that trend, and then you're just like getting the slow, chuggery stuff. So yeah, it's sitting right at that line. That's my favorite, like fast moving average type of spot. If Josh were on here, he would be talking about like TK recrosses on the cloud, that kind of thing, where you go from like ambiguous bullishness to, like close your longs to reopen your longs.
Sure.
I think he said in 2017, it only happened 4 times and it was 100% hit rate on like just mega moves off of it. And it's trying to decide that right now. So Josh is traveling. The duck is out. That's what Josh would say.
A bit too early for eulogies, but yeah, no, I agree. I'm not sure what the duck would say. I guess he puts a lot of weight, understandably, on this weekly breakdown in Bitcoin. I think the lower low close type of deal. I think his charts are somewhere on Twitter as well. I'm sure, being the reasonable man that he is, similar conclusion. This is resistance. Well, that's one way of putting it.
Be like, sure. Why are you buying here, you idiot?
Yeah,
this is where you're selling.
I hate to speak for people, obviously, but I think his version of events, which is reasonable given I've got similar type of areas, is that this is resistance. If it closes above it on the weekly, the bears have nothing left, and it's a full send, and that full send would likely recapture some dominance and other things, whatever they may be. I share that unease to some extent, in that the weekly sort of technically bounced, quote unquote, in the middle of nowhere, which at times can be uncomfortable. But if someone wants to come in and buy up this thing and break every level, I'm not exactly going to complain.
Yeah, you did a one of those 2-minute Twitter videos with the level at 45, with the level at 51.
Yeah,
and I was like, Cred, how freaking rude of you to point all the way down there at 45.
Yeah, 45, which is the thing is, like, I spent 10 seconds in that video saying, look, if it comes back to this pre-breakout range from December or the start of the year, for any reason, Black Swan, whatever, just buy it and think later. And then I spent the rest of the time talking about this range, and then, as you can imagine, all the comments started complaining about, oh, why are you targeting 38? Bull markets only pull back this much, that much, etc., etc. Certainly a weird way to interpret that. But yeah, I think it's reasonable to look at this in the weekly time frame and say, look, we're still within this range of this consolidation, right? And the good trades, or at least the trades which signal a break from the range, tend to happen at the extremes, or the clear signals tend to happen at the extremes. Probably a better way of putting it. Whereas one extreme, it's the top at around 58k, 59k, whatever. Whereas the other extreme, it's in the sort of mid 40s. Okay, where's price right now? Well, it's at the upper extreme and hasn't completely blasted it yet. If it blasts through it, great. We have I expect 3 or 4 candles that look like this to follow through, and there's really not much to be missed in that regard. I don't really believe in being that late in bull markets. Probabilistically, the chances that you're late versus just hopping onto a trend versus being sidelined, I quite like those odds, especially when the structure supports it. So I'm someone who doesn't mind paying up for confirmation if I think that what's left in terms of the follow-through is significant. I mean, the clearest example of that was the 6K breakdown, right? A lot of our good friends lost a lot of Bitcoin as well as hope and health markers trying to buy the dip when 6K broke down, and that was obviously a bit of a difficult and tumultuous affair. Whereas the much easier trade was actually buying the reclaim of 6K and then watching price teleport through everything kind of in a straight line, right? There's kind of time constraints that come into it. There are mental capital constraints which also play a part. How, even if I get this bottom long, how long can I realistically hold on to it? And also, what's the likelihood that I sell it as soon as it gets to the first kind of interesting area? The lowest entry isn't necessarily the best entry, and that's kind of my expectation here. I'd rather get like a, oh my god, it's so obviously bullish, blast through everything type of entry, and then ride the 3-4 candles that follow, rather than buy the range high, hoping that it works out. That's at least my take.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just have a hard time risking off in this market.
Yeah, I understand.
And what you brought up in that video is basically, if it doesn't get all the way down here, then you wait till it reclaims 51, all the way down here being 45.
Yeah.
Wait till it reclaims like 51.3 or whatever that close was, and then you have that range from 51 to 55, 56.
Yes.
But that trade was like way less interesting because like your total, like that's like your swing trade type of thing that happened. It ended up happening in 2 days. And then it kind of leaves you again in no man's land between 56 and 58, 58.5, like you said. Who cares if you missed anything in that realm?
I agree. As long as you didn't get liquidated on that drop, I think you outperformed most crypto futures trading participants, right? Looking just at open interest, those people have been gone for a while. And it's one of the more interesting things if you just look at Coinalyzer's average open interest. Like the leverage market's been flat ever since this weekend drop. Ben Askren fell, open interest fell, and neither have recovered seemingly at the time of this live stream, at least. And even we've retraced most of this dump, but you can see open interest hasn't even come close to where it was. Like the leverage market, the future side of things is still wrecked, which is also why I see that some people are pointing out that some longs are starting to get back into the market. Funding and predicting funding is like starting to pick up. I think at these levels of open interest, that's far less kind of scary for me than it would be otherwise. I'm not too concerned. I didn't see anything kind of bearish or scary in the futures side of things, especially looking at like who's left. It's a bit of a mass grave situation. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I don't know what the actual open interest trend looks like. I haven't heard anything saying like funding is so awful that like be cautious of your longs.
Right.
But like a combination of high open interest, high funding, longs having to pay for the privilege. If all that were occurring at the same time, you're at like major resistance or overextension or something. It doesn't seem like we're in that regard. Like $15 billion worth of open interest got liquidated. I mean, that's a lot. So I think that essentially gives permission to move up and even break out of a 12-week consolidation.
For sure. And that's always sexy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if anything, someone like me who's been bullish on ETH, that should be my potential warning sign. But it's hard to just look at ETH and be bearish because it's just like uber Chad candles and it's sitting almost at 2800 1 2 3 4 5 weeks in a row positive, with an impulse week after 3 weeks that were like a little more choppy positive.
That's really impressive.
So I think that it's very, very hard to be bearish there.
And that was in the face of market-wide weakness as well. Like if you were to look at this chart in isolation, there's no way you predict a 30% Bitcoin pullback, right? That's the outrageous thing. You look at these weekly candles, and then you have to come to terms that we had like a sort of bull market 30% scary-looking pullback in the course of what we see in front of us, which just seems so unlikely given there's like almost no evidence of weakness there, which is really impressive. I think there still might be a relative play left. One of the things I sort of tweeted in passing, which was long Ethereum when Bitcoin stops looking like crap. And I still think that's look, I'm not going to ignore the flows, right? When the market looked on the brink, money was buying ETH. Money talks when it comes to these sorts of things. So I can see a world in which, Bitcoin breaks out, dominance goes up, ETH BTC down for a bit, but in terms of the continuation of the uptrend generally, I can still see, apart from that short-term rotation, ETH continue to outperform, at least if the indications that we've had over the past couple of weeks mean anything. I mean, the basic logic being, if this is what it looks like when the market's weak, imagine what it looks like when the market's like unabashedly strong,
Yeah, I think it looks like potentially plowing through 0.055. Can you pull up the ETH BTC chart? Because this has been my narrative since ETH 0.03 or whatever, whatever it was. And it's given lots of opportunities to be nervous about it. But like, I just basically believe that it's going to pound into that line, and actually, I think it's going to go through it.
I think that's likely. Yeah.
And it leaves me looking for that 0.08 target, which was kind of that third third lower high from the start of the bear market. So that's my real hopium bull market target is 0.08, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's like significant dollar levels for ETH.
Oh, for sure.
I don't even know what that percent move is from here. But I imagine that's like 4 or 5K ETH.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just over 70% in ETH BTC terms. So
yeah, so that's like BTC might be going up, and ETH does that. That's your like parabolic blow off on ETH on a local basis, and then maybe ETH consolidates for a really long time or starts a bear market. I don't know. probably consolidates.
Yeah, ETH BTC looks insane. That's sort of it. My whole idea was premised on this weekly range, and the additional sort of point was that the market rarely fakes out twice. So if this is our multi-year range, and this was kind of the obvious attempt to break out which failed, if the market then closes above that same level, which has already had a fake out again, the likelihood of a double fake out is in my experience, when it comes to good levels, is incredibly low. You normally get one, and if that's not enough to send the market lower, like if it closes above it, like double fake out's exceptionally rare, it's probably going to full send, and that's kind of been the case. And it's been, it's all the breakout levels have been holding. It's what you want to see in a strong trend. And again, the context is really important, right? This is like a multi-year consolidation in ETH BTC. I mean, I could superimpose some arbitrary diagonal type of thing, but I think it's important with big moves not to lose sight of the context or the bigger picture, right? If this is a multi-year breakout, you don't sell it for like a 10-20% move unless you're really wrong. So yeah, I don't think, given that all those circumstances, trading back within this range is at all unreasonable. In fact, I don't see much in the way in terms of resistance, at least.
Yeah, I think Kobe was telling me the flippening's around 0.17 or something like that at current levels. If you think the flippening is inevitable, then actually, like, the ETH BTC trade has a really, really long way to go. Which would be, like this, the ETH path, and I want your thoughts on this. Like, sure. I've heard some good, compelling arguments basically saying that ETH's current path is very similar in a pure price perspective. I think it was Raul Paul talking about this, to like what Bitcoin's was in 2017. Mm-hmm. So it gets to 4 to 5K, and like the people that have been in since the bear market, the bottom of the bear market, are like, whew, this is awesome, taking some off the table. Right. And they just cannot comprehend the Bitcoin move to 20K. And interestingly, the prior all-time high of 1,400, very close to Bitcoin's prior all-time high from the 2013 cycle at 1,300 or whatever. All of the mental models are very similar, with very similar dollar amounts. Throw the market cap stuff out the window, just look at the price action. Mm-hmm. That leaves this potential for like the long tenure blow off into the end of the year for ETH really having significantly more upside in my mind, which can result in some kind of temporary flippening. So like I'm trying to give myself this outside potential of an ETH flippening at the end of the year and like blasting into 15, 20K levels. I know that sounds absurd, but I'm trying not to ignore that possibility.
Right. Yeah. That's reasonable, right? In terms of not ignoring the possibility, makes sense. We've seen weirder stuff, not purely in a flippening perspective, but just in terms of what happens at the peak. When bull markets approach their peak, or some, we get to the really crazy portions, because that's the paradox of how at least crypto bull markets typically come to an end, right? The parabolic phase is the most profitable, but it also tends to be the shortest, and therefore the most volatile, and therefore also the one where you probably keep the least of all your gains, right? You become super rich and super poor all within the space of a few weekly candles, and if you hold on to any of it, you're a legend.
Yeah. Somebody in the chat said it sounds absurd, but crypto is absurd. I love that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I certainly wouldn't roll
Doge,
it out. I'm not.
Doge is like holding 30 cents right now.
Oh man, that chart. Yeah, I mean, I'm not an anything maximalist. I just look at what's being bid by people who are smarter than me and have more money and are not afraid to deploy it. So if it goes in that direction.
Excuse me, sir, but I refuse to acknowledge that someone bidding Doge is smarter than me, right?
Yeah, with Doge, I mean, maybe fair enough. You do start to get in some uncomfortable truths in terms of holding Dogecoin versus holding Bitcoin, right? Looking at Doge BTC, etc., etc. But especially on the ETH side of things, like if that's trend continuation and ETH BTC just keeps going, I'm in no position to ignore that, right? And I generally think the way I like to structure spot holdings a lot of the time is Bitcoin and ETH as go-to blue chips, whatever. But then I'll also look at like higher beta type of stuff to hold as well, just for some spice or outperformance in relative, in altcoin windows, or if correlations get weird, etc. So for me, for example, for quite a long time, for a lot of when FTT was mooning, I was holding close to 0 Bitcoin, and I was basically all in FTT. Because when FTT would go up, when Bitcoin would go up, FTT would go up more. And then it would also dump less than Bitcoin, it would go down. It was like a really great relationship. So I think if you can find something like that, something which can mirror a so-called blue chip, and it's liquid and it's going to stick around, that I think that's pretty good bull market plays. So interesting one on the correlation side of things is actually Solana. Last I checked, or at least I saw this bit of data posted on Twitter, it's inversely correlated with ETH, but only on down days. Right, which is super interesting. Reminds me of the whole. Do you remember XRP pumping when the whole market was dying? Just so the good old garlic house attention to XRP sort of play. It sort of reminds me of that, right? If ETH is having a bad day, Solana will typically be up. So yeah, it's a very long-winded answer, but I think like my bull market continuation bags in terms of higher caps: Bitcoin, ETH, FTT, Sol, BNB in brackets. And then USD margined shitcoins to entertain in the interim.
As somebody who likes to focus on price action, do you pay much attention to like where does all this stack up in market cap and like relative potential for outperformance purely due to where it is on the list? Or do you try to ignore it?
But then stuff like Dogecoin happens.
And
I'm
it's like number 5.
Yeah, I think you end up being a bit of a middle bell curve type of person.
I fit very well in that.
Like you either have just no understanding of sort of market cap, relative value, etc., and you just play the 50 IQ. I like the coin and it's going up, and you just ride a trend beyond any reasonable market cap. Or you're on the 150 IQ, where maybe you've got some like extended projections or some sort of model which allow for pretty high market caps and valuations. And for you to ride out those overextensions. I really think if you try to ground yourself, if the market's risk on, you end up in the not going to make it portion of the bell curve. I don't know.
I've got a long-term rental with a king-size bed in the middle of the bell curve. Trying to get out of that location, and I'd like to move to the right, but I feel like from a percentage chance, like I'm more likely to make it if I move to the left,
Yeah, I feel like I'm closer to the left than to the right as well.
That's like super ambitious to try to move to the right side of that curve.
Yeah, you gotta follow the path of least resistance, right? If I'm already like one foot into the 50 IQ portion, crossing over can't be that difficult.
Brandon in your chat says, I mean, these market caps right now are just wild. Are they? That's my question.
That's the thing. Relative to what, right?
Yeah.
It's the old crypto meme that it'll go higher than you think, it'll go lower than you think as well, it'll consolidate for longer, etc., etc.
Yeah.
I don't think if you're going, at least if you think the market's going to blow off in a similar fashion than it has in previous cycles, I think abandoning reasonableness is almost a prerequisite if you want to get involved and try to make money on the final leg, because that's when everything becomes ungrounded and crazy, etc. So it's almost a weird thing for me, like how unreasonable I'm willing to be depends on how the market looks, right? So if the market's looking bearish, I'll kind of look at these valuations, market caps, etc., and think, right, maybe it makes sense to be defensive, and the money in the market seems to agree. But then if the market's really bullish despite all of these allegedly high valuations, then why should I care, right? If people want to buy them, and the market's liquid and there's an appetite for continuation, I'm not going to be the midwit standing in the way of that.
I'm typically I've been the midwit most of the time. It's not a profitable place to be. No. Like you're just like constantly trying to say like, I don't think I'm wrong. You know, it just timed it wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like, I just happened to miss the gains along the way. I have a question for you in terms of a coin where I took a position today, and I want you to tell me like grade this position. And
Go on.
Sushi USDT.
Ooh.
Like, I keep looking at this chart over and over again, like it's just garbage. Ever since it broke down, this is where I got lucky. Like, I looked at it from a relative potential standpoint at the like March 20th ish, and as soon as it broke down, I got out. Like, was like, nope. And then I just been unwilling to play it.
Yeah.
Never got to its 200-day moving average versus BTC, but it did play like to the wick off of the January levels versus BTC.
Okay, yeah.
But versus the dollar, it's like one of these, I don't even know what to think of it type of patterns. Like, it looks like a massive distribution pattern since the beginning of February with a fake breakout and then a breakdown in April. And now it's on this potential reclaim. And like, I punted on this partially because it's hyper liquid.
Yeah.
So like the ability to get out is really good. What do you think about a setup like this? Do you think this is too middle curve or what?
So the way I like to pay attention, I mean, we followed Sushi a ton for Technical Roundup, like in the newsletter or whatever.
Yeah.
And the way I tend to approach these things is while its behavior is like predictable and repeating, you want to ride that trend. As soon as it shows that fundamental shift in behavior, it immediately becomes less attractive until such a time that it resumes that preceding and almost choreographed behavior, right? So in this case, you can kind of clearly see the difference between the markup phase and pretty much what it's done since then, right? So I want to be in the market. I mean, I know it sounds obvious, but it looks more like this. And as soon as it starts doing that, that's materially different enough to what it was for me to wait for evidence of the left side to emerge rather than trying to time the trend break. That's why generally I'm not that averse in bull markets to buying all-time high breakouts. Because if you're right, you'll be right quickly, and also your invalidation is pretty close. Whereas if you're entering during the course of this chop, I mean, how do you know whether, again, as you mentioned, is it a distribution? How long is it going to range for? If it's going to range for? What if it is a bearish retest? Like, I think I like playing the game on easy mode where possible. And I don't think a bull market offers a shortage of easy mode opportunities, at least when it comes to identifying charts. So for me, there would need to be a really good, some sort of underlying reason or compelling narrative to get involved in a chart which just kind of isn't trending, if that makes sense. I mean, the BTC pair for me kind of just broke down and hasn't done much since then. So on the weekly time frame, it had its first lower low close than it has in a while, and it kind of nothing's happened since then. So that's whatever. It's not bullish. It kind of broke down and it's stuck. That's fine. The USD pair, I think it's safe to say it kind of stopped trending on the daily time frame. The price action we have now is pretty different from the DeFi friendly period of time we had. But even on the weekly time frame, if we look at something I like to look at when it comes to limited candles and higher time frames and altcoins is higher high closes or lower low closes. You tend to get some pretty decent levels, even if you don't have like wide sweeping horizontal levels. So in this case, we had the lower low close through wherever this is. I should probably just add the level itself. Around whatever, under $15, and that's kind of where we're back to retest. I mean, so this is the underside of resistance for me, just from a purely TA point of view. If it wants to reclaim that, I think that's probably good to go. You could be conservative and just say you take the whole pre-breakout range, 15 to 17, which kind of looks more reasonable on the intraday time frame, and to say, on the daily time frame, and to say, look, break out from this range high, make a higher high, give me something impulsive, and then I'll get involved and see if there's continuation. But otherwise, as you mentioned, it's kind of just gone sideways since then, and it's your guess is as good as mine, whether it's some sort of bigger distribution or chop, reaccumulation, whatever. It sort of reminds me of, it's almost the inverse of those 2017 would you buy this charts, where stuff just went sideways and down. And my answer was always, well, why wouldn't I wait for some sort of impulse or sign of strength or something to be the trigger to distinguish it from the millions of charts which are just moving sideways, right? I think it's kind of reasonable to set a similar standard for altcoins a lot of the time. Like, hey, the market's bullish, altcoins are flying, lots of them are just trending up or making higher highs, whatever. If you're going to get involved in something, it's not exactly a tall order to tell them to break market structure or reclaim something. Rather,
if you hit the 1 hour or the 4 hour on this is what was kind of justifying my trade, because I agree it's like sitting here at a quasi resistance, but I liked the way this was kind of shaping up and consolidating and using these lower time frames to try to help anticipate whether, like, in these DeFi products, even the really liquid ones, it's like something like this can go from $14.50, $15 to $17 or $18 in no time.
Yes.
That's pretty nice move and a pretty nice buffer for the rest of your trade.
How does Uni look? Have you looked at that relative?
Oh gosh, the way it like rounds the top on Uni, I really struggle to find entries. And Sushi I have as well recently because of that, everything you just described. And I resisted trying to buy a bottom or like anticipating getting ahead of the bottom, that kind of thing, like at the $10, $11 level.
Yeah.
But I do think it's bottomed on Sushi, and now it's like, here's this consolidation before it actually properly breaks out. That's what kind of justified it with that mid time frame consolidation. The Uni one though, like the way it just it reminds me of like up only markets in the S&P. Like
right.
it just rounds and rounds and rounds and grinds, and it just looks so toppy, and then it just impulses up. And I guess it is a daily chart, but like that looked very bad 5 days ago.
Did. Yeah. No, I totally relate to that. Like generally speaking, when a market falls back below its breakout levels, you immediately feel uncomfortable. And as you mentioned with the S&P, you end up being confronted by this chart where you keep getting higher highs, but the breakouts don't hold. Instead, it dips, but it makes a lower low in doing so, right? So it's kind of this eternal, I don't know, sort of delayed ascending triangle, whatever type of thing, where if you trade the breakout, you're not going to have a good time. Your only option is to anticipate the higher low. But when you're trading altcoins, I think a lot of the time trading the breakout, or at least post-breakout strength, is what you want to see, right? At least I do. Like if an altcoin breaks out and then falls back below its breakout level, that's like reason to be suspicious 9 times out of 10, right? Like something's gone wrong, because a lot of the time they just keep ripping. Whereas Uni, as you mentioned, it's this S&P-esque almost paradox where if you trade the breakout, you only have fun for a while, but then if other altcoins just keep going up after this point versus you having to just this upwards grind, I can understand the appeal of other stuff, although I'm not sure if Sushi's the answer for me personally, at least.
Yeah, I mean, part of what I run into is even fully diluted, Sushi's 3.6 billion and Uniswap's 40 billion, 41 billion. And I don't know, like, is Uniswap worth that much more? That's more than a 10x over Sushi. I don't know that Uniswap's more than 10x over Sushi. Certainly from a token value accrual, the way it sends fees back to token holders, Uniswap doesn't do any of those things. Like Uniswap is a governance token and has a much more potentially unfriendly regulatory environment for like feeding protocol fees back to token holders. And I know this is all like 100 IQ thinking again, but I'm like, I don't know. Like I see the way like Sushi holders end up earning fees from people participating in Sushi. I also see Sushi like expanding what they want to be to where like they want to take on Aave as well, and they have like all these things in addition to being an AMM. And they'll probably figure out a way to like mimic some of the stuff that Uni 3.0 does. So I'm introducing fundamentals, I know, in addition to the price, but I have a hard time buying that like roundy top weak breakout Uni stuff when it's the $40 billion protocol, when I can buy the $4 billion protocol that looks like it has a chance to do much more. And like, if you blink and wake up one day and Sushi's 8 billion instead of 4 billion, who cares? But if Uni is 80 billion instead of 40 billion, like everybody's talking about that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And it just seems like the path of least resistance is for Sushi to play some catch up there.
I think the catch up plays are often superior when an entire sector is bid. So, for example, what we tend to see is value accrual gets centralized when there's like the winners rise to the top if the market's not as strong as before, right? Like if capital rotates out of DeFi towards something else, then whereas in the past maybe out of the 5 main DEX coins will have been going up, maybe 2 of them do, right? Or maybe one of them does. So I think a lot of the reasoning when it comes to relative value plays, they're right, but they tend to be mistimed. So I think the logic in terms of higher beta or catch up, it's got more to capture, etc. I really like those types of arguments, but for me, the market conditions more broadly need to be facilitative of that, right? The hot, the hot ball of money needs to be in a specific sector for me to then have employ that type of reasoning and say, well, look, this has got to go somewhere. Are they going to buy the higher cap, which trades technically like crap, etc., or is the sort of uni sushi contrast going on there? My difficulties arise if the entire sector doesn't look bid, or there are clear winners and losers starting to emerge, or capital just isn't, the cream rises to the top, if you will. I think those catch-up plays generally become less attractive, and money just kind of sticks to strength. But if the ETH continuation DeFi summer argument has follow through, that's when I think those types of relative value plays are really, really strong.
Yeah, but it tends to be a value trap, or like a relative value trap. Curve is one where I also have gotten kind of suckered into this.
USD or? Yeah,
Curve, CRV USD is good.
Yeah.
But this was like anticipate breakout, get breakout fails. Then break down is not even that severe. Now it's right back where it started.
Yeah.
Except for now you've been pissing about for a couple weeks, like while other stuff could have done things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now I get interested in these trades, and I'm like, okay, am I supposed to be back in this now? You know what I mean? Like, or am I just going to go through the same like self-mutilation process again of like not making any money, buying at resistance, anticipating the breakout or whatever?
I've seen Curve come up a lot in these DeFi catch up or just DeFi rotational arguments. This is consolidating, right? It's moving sideways, and it's up at its range high. I think, interestingly enough, we can borrow from our ETH BTC analysis and make the same argument. Like, you've got a really big level. As you mentioned, the market poked above it, and the sell-off wasn't that crazy, right? Like, it was fine. It didn't break anything. Like, Bitcoin
it didn't feel very good having exposure to it.
Yeah, I can imagine from a high to low, etc. But structurally speaking, like, worse damage has been seen, right? And I think we can borrow ETH BTC and say when you have one breakout above a good level, the second one is far less likely to be a breakout. So that lands at around $3.50 or thereabouts. I think if you get daily or weekly, whatever, anything that really starts coming close to this so-called fake out high, that'll probably get smoked if the market's bid, and then really you just get to pick round numbers, which is always fun.
And that's where you should go. Yeah, $5 or $6.
Yeah, etc. That would be my sort of roadmap for that, if you will. But I totally see the argument for positioning for the impulses in a lot of this DeFi stuff. It's just not a setup that I've managed to make work for me. So I always have to be the midwit, either trading at the level or the consolidation after the level's broken. That tends to be where I step in.
Yeah, and like meanwhile, you're like trying to force it on these, and then you look at Solana or something, and it's like it's up only. Like it's all you get. It's just number go up all the time. And like what you try to decide where's that stop, and like somebody like me is like, this is the top, don't worry, this is the top.
I mean, you with your Solana photo shoot, selling the selling pressure that introduced the market seemed to be unprecedented. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah,
but yeah. I mean, look,
I convinced like tens of people to take profits.
Yeah, your market impact. I saw you in the open interest. I just knew it was the ledger take profit. But I mean, the hilarious part is this candle was actually, I think, on the Bitcoin nuke day, or like on a big red day for the market.
Well, the one when it up 30%.
Like. Yeah, I mean that's really crazy. Also, just a pro tip for new entrants or maybe experienced entrants in the market: no matter what you do, don't turn off your log and go back to linear, because suddenly everything seems really far away. So don't do that. stick to log, and things are materially more reasonable.
If you want to stay on the very profitable 50 IQ side, never turn on linear.
Yeah, exactly. Things just start to look slightly different. But yeah, with Sol, you know what? Like, it reminds me of I probably shouldn't say it because it sounds terrible out of context. But XVG, right? You remember?
Oh,
Verge.
wow.
Yeah,
wow.
I know it sounds bad, but the whole point is,
I think Solana has a better fundamental justification.
Well, you're saying Solana is fundamentally better than Dogecoin Dark. I'm not sure. I'd need to get some in-depth analysis. But the thing is, people got into Verge early, right? And it mega mooned, and they sold at like at a 2x, right? And on the chart at the time, relative to what happened, the move looked enormous. But then if you look at it from when the bull market topped out, those little 2 to 3x's seemed completely inconsequential in contrast of where the market went and where the trend ended up. So I think with a lot of these charts, the TA is almost secondary. You've got short-term trends to focus on, but just generally speaking, if you are correct that this is at the inception point of some future high cap, etc., recency bias can be your biggest enemy when it comes to these sorts of things.
Yeah, because they can just continue to move. You're like, I'm not buying your 10x, and then it becomes a 40x.
Exactly.
And it's like this thing 4x while my crap just chopped sideways. Like that hurts, Like when you look at what Solana has done, and it's like I could have just said, ooh, Samcoin good, and like bought it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's like, and now I'm multiples more wealthier than I was, like trying to say like, nah, I think this has moved a little bit too much since it was $1.50 and now it's at 15. And RIP me. And it's like we've been through this where we've seen stuff pull 50x's and 100x's, and we're still like hesitant at the 10x. Is this just like is this just kind of PTSD from watching a bear market like continue to like destroy people trying to play these trends?
Yeah, I think that's a large part of it. The multipliers are still uncomfortable, especially when you look at Bitcoin's own multiplier from March. I mean, that's the thing. A lot of our natural reference point for a lot of people is still March, right? Whenever we try to get like a big overview or reminder of where we've come from, our kind of origin story, we still go back to March, which in itself is a really illogical and absurd place to go because it's like a complete exchange-wide global liquidity crisis. Everything's broken, BitMEX, DDoS, etc. Like that shouldn't be that shouldn't be your reference point for figuring, contrasting to where the market is now. But it is, because that day was so fateful for many.
Do you ever wonder, like, what would the market look like today if that didn't happen?
If
like,
March didn't happen, or or which part of it?
Yeah, if March didn't happen, is that too hypothetical of a question? Like not just March in Bitcoin, but like the COVID scare. Like people were calling for like secular bear markets anyway. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like COVID was just a trigger for it, but then like what resulted from that was not like a natural contraction in the market. It was a massive stimulus from every single government, and like everybody goes home and day trades. Like it was this perfect storm of like an enormous influx of money into markets that I think like really set the stage for like everything to number go up only.
Yeah.
And I really wonder, like, would we still be kind of languishing in a sub 20K consolidation if COVID didn't happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Thing is, at the time, because I remember some of the analysis and whatever else, like market structure was looking rather unfortunate for Bitcoin before the big crash. Like we were still trading within this, like we had the 6K reclaim, which is awesome, right? We all like that. But we were still within this range here, which wasn't doing anyone a ton of favors.
No, it just got chopped up.
Yeah, you just got chopped up, and you just had lower highs going on. Lower highs, lower lows, like really not much else. And I remember specifically on this high here, there were a lot of like reasonable calls for price to pull back to sort of maybe this range low here at whatever 7K or thereabouts. Like there were some pretty reasonable targets treating this as they should have, which was a consolidation. And then obviously we just only undercut that by 50%, which is
I
cool.
think some funds that manage money, in fact, can you put your chart back on?
Yeah, certainly.
I've been like sharing your screen sometimes, so I'm like dual screening on my end. Travis Kling that was on our show, like they were talking about how they were to a percentage, like 10-15% net short when that happened.
Mhm.
And I think it was essentially anticipating like the market does need to calm down some. And then it was obviously much more than that. And they ended up like not only surviving, but thriving as everything melted off. I think if we were not like sitting at resistance and already starting to pull back some, like the damage to the institutional money in crypto would have been even worse.
Yeah, that's a fair conclusion. I also know Gainsey bot was short into this nuke, which is a great.
That's how Gainsey made it.
Which is a great thing for Gainsey and all subscribers. But the thing is,
You know,
the
that-
asymmetry will always be to the upside, right? Like we nuked 80% or whatever. It's like 50% in a day. But then when you're in the bull market, like an altcoin can do multiples of that in just a couple of days, right? So that's why people prioritize survival. It's not because they're just repeating old trading cliches, but it's because if you do survive that kind of stuff and you stick around for when the market is back or when the conditions are better, like even if you missed the entire drop, the scope to make it all back in one trade, unless you were fully leveraged, of course, is worth sticking around for.
Back in June 2019, I think that is actually a pretty reasonable top up there, like where it looks like those were pretty painful moves up, right? Everybody was like done with 4K, and we were up there at 12, and it did those 2 wicks in a row.
Yeah.
And then consolidated forever. Like I was not as prepared for that impulse down as I should have been. But in hindsight, the hindsight in me says like, okay, well that looks pretty clearly like distribution. This market just was not ready. But then it just continued to provide pain. That's like that's total bear market price action. The dump down and then the sideways and then the nuke everybody both directions before going down more and then consolidating and then moving out. Like all that is like horrible sideways chop that like that people lost a lot of money in that.
Except Donald. I think
space.
He's the only person who knows how to trade this kind of stuff. It's just ridiculous, frankly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I agree in terms of not just the bigger trends, but how it moved from point A to B was not very pleasant.
Right, and I think that unless you're Don and you have like bear market superpowers, that was actually pretty painful.
Yeah.
And the breakdown from COVID and then infinite bid afterwards, it really offered clarity in a way of like, okay, well, there's a trend here, and it like completely nuked anyone that was ill prepared and reset the market and gave it the potential to be bullish. It gave it an allowance to be bullish. And that's what led me into that next consolidation in the summer of 2020 to be extraordinarily bullish, even though like you could have pointed at it and said, this is just 2019's consolidation all over again. But I was like out of my mind bullish throughout that. And that's where I was really able to set myself apart, because it allowed me to have a mental headspace of being risk on rather than risk off and take advantage of opportunities during that consolidation.
Yeah,
anyway,
that definitely paid dividends. I remember clearly, at least for myself, 2 points which cured my disbelief on the way up. The first was, if I remember correctly, I think it was the reclaim of 7,600, which was like my first big area that I had after the bear market nuke. So for me, this is just like a really big level. And then down here, it seemed like trading up to here was a pipe dream, right? And then the first time I sort of broke out, I mean, I bought some of this and tweeted about it. I didn't feel good about it. That was just one of those like, hey, either this all goes to zero or this is a pretty good buy, or it's a good buy. It's either a good buy or it's a good buy. There's no middle sort of solution there. So my first portion of disbelief was firmly cured when we started trading above 7,600, and I was all with green weekly candles. So I'm like, okay, now this isn't just like it's a bearish retest, something else. Like we're starting to reclaim structure after this big event. And then the other one, which is a really good but painful example of like how trading high time frame levels can be a bit of a labor of love, is what now looks like the most obvious Bitcoin SR flip in history. It's this monthly level at 10.7, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, I don't know if you remember, I remember it like it was yesterday, how vivid the sentiment was pretty much within these 3 months, right? Because if you measure this, I think the high came in at like 12K, and this is the consolidation that you were talking about, and the low was at like 9,600. So you've got like a $3,000 range, which in those terms is like huge percentage-wise. Meanwhile, you're waiting 3 months for this apparent bullish retest to do anything. And, sentiment was really good up here, really shit down there. But for me, that's my kind of macro bullish trigger, like the main sort of anti-disbelief thing was this monthly support resistance flip. And then obviously closing above the highest close at 14K, at that point, it's lights out. Completely.
I remember, I guess it was around 9,600 where that bottomed, and I was like hyper bullish in that, in that bottom, because in that same sense that you're just talking about, like I refused to acknowledge weakness, like the fake weakness, that I felt at that point, like that impulse down just felt like liquidity for someone to fill up and
look how rough this looks though. Just
it's awful.
I mean,
it's awful.
It's just really vile. We're
looks
really
like
privileged nowadays, aren't we?
Yeah, it looks like Forex. Like people act like it must have been easy, but like a lot of people, especially because leverage degenerates tend to be leverage degenerates until they turn to zero.
Right.
Like they don't necessarily make it just because they got in before 10K or before DeFi summer or before alts mooned this year. There's a lot of disagreements and lack of consensus on what's next throughout that. Mm-hmm. And it'll be the same way as these things wind down. Like it'll probably be like peak bullishness at the top. You can point back to tweets of probably mine and other people's and like saying hilariously bullish things in December 2017, and you're like, you idiot, it just 20x, man, what's wrong with you? Yeah. But until you get your brain in that landscape, it's pretty hard to imagine. But there's also hubris in trying to predict it, right? Like Just like my hubris with calling Solana tops.
And even worse than hubris is the sort of opportunity cost, right? Being sidelined in the market, trying to call the top. Or do whatever, especially towards the end. Again, it's that paradox, right? It's when it gets parabolic, that's where you'll make the most, but also likely keep the smallest amount of that. And I'm sure there's some really silly, those S&P statistics, like, oh, if you missed these many best days in the market, your annualized returns are really shit, or something like that. Go on.
Anytime you like moved partially to cash in like a 401k, Fidelity and some of the Schwab and them, they'll like show you that statistic. They're like, huge percentage of the returns happen on like these days. Are you sure you want to sell, you idiot?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes, I do. This market is overvalued. Please put me in the safety
put me in the
of
mid-wits.
US dollar. Yeah. Give me some high yield bonds, baby.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, even if it's like, oh, it's the top, what is it? Well, what are you going to do about it, right? If there is a top coming at some point, you can sit there sidelined in cash, but realistically, like these market conditions are still extraordinary, and they're uniquely extraordinary in present conditions because we've seen that you can have Bitcoin look like shit and still have plenty of opportunity across several different sectors available at the same time without even having to incur directional Bitcoin risk. So this idea that there's like, okay, the market, whatever that means, has topped, therefore I will now just go away and do whatever, like crypto, I think, has evolved so far beyond that, that there's always something to do,
Unless outside markets come in and like really take us down, I feel like we're probably setting up, even if it's only a few weeks, like, an unimpressive new high on Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. But even if it's only a few weeks, I think we're probably setting up for just hilarious turbo moves up, kind of across the board. That's my gut feeling. Do you think I'm insane for saying that? Like, I just don't see the setup for it not trapping you into new highs on Bitcoin at the worst case. Yeah. Best case, it just goes, but like worst case, I feel like it goes and makes a new high over the period of a couple of weeks, and we go to like 68 or something like that. And then you get at least a couple of weeks of like everything going ham,
Yeah. I mean, look, even just purely technically or whatever, you need to always keep in mind, like, who's being presented with the setups and to what extent are they taking advantage of those setups. Like, I think on the weekly time frame, the bears got like the chart on a platter almost, right? You got a failed breakout, an ugly consolidation, a big nuke, like leverage just completely trashed, etc., etc. Like, if this isn't good enough for you to sell down, then kind of nothing will be, right? Or at the very least, it's not here. So that's what I always kind of stick to, at least in my mind, that when good bearish setups fail, that's really bullish, and when good bullish setups fail, that's really bearish. I think the ball is in the bears' court at the moment, at least on the weekly time frame, given how the candles have been closing in terms of structure. If they don't take it here, they've got no business doing anything in this range. Try again at 80k or whatever. That's my view.
Yeah, take your shot, bears, basically.
Right, and it's also really hard to be kind of macro bearish when you see what ETH is doing, for example. Like, I understand the analogical argument that, Bitcoin's topped, altcoins exit pump, and then we all die, and then it's the heat death of the universe. Like, I understand that chronology, but part of me just feels like it's really difficult to be bearish or risk off when you see ETH just bid up so aggressively.
And when you see, I mean, quite frankly, like, if you see Doge go to 40 cents and you think that that's not going to flow into like another round on DeFi, when you see BSC, like Cake is $43 or whatever, you think that's not going to flow back. Like, the people making this money, they're not going to just move straight to cash. They're going to rotate the hot ball of money, like you mentioned. And if you don't think that's going to go to premier DeFi assets and also like way down the list stuff that people want to speculate in, I think you're wrong.
It's a tough claim to support, right? And the evidence doesn't seem to be there in abundance for the time being. On that continuation note that you mentioned, the money flowing to the blue chips, DeFi, etc., it really looks like BNB wants to play catch up, at least on an upcoming daily 2-day basis.
I was say it's weird even calling it ketchup because it just went freaking ham at the same time.
This chart is insane. But as the beneficiary of the whole exchange token go up, this is the thing about BNB, right? CZ will find, like any narrative that's active in crypto, CZ will find a way for some of that value to accrue to BNB, right? Like DeFi, NFTs, with the coin direct listing, exchange token type of play, that it seems that BNB has got its fingers in all the pies, right? Which is really good if you want to trade it on the long side, because if crypto is bullish, there's probably some causal mechanism by which BNB gets to benefit from that. On the TA side of things, it kind of looks like it wants to go. Even if you take the extreme of this range on the daily time frame, just around 600, you add resistance, you got a higher low, and then it's back at that level again, and doesn't look like a ton of selling pressure from the available evidence at the moment. I think if you get a full body daily close through the top of this range, I think this kind of impulse, consolidation impulse will just look like one of these things where we are kind of here right now, and then the markup follows. So that's how do you feel
about BNB ETH?
That's a good one.
I mean, that's the one that I'm not sure I can do the TA on it, but like from a weekly position, I mean, it seems like this is where they need to continue the trend.
Step up, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. And that's the thing, right? Like if you're trying to outperform ETH, like if you're trying to play altcoins and ETH looks how ETH looks, you kind of need to look at alt ETH pairs, as you mentioned, rather than just looking at alt BTC pairs or even alt USD pairs, right? Like if all the altcoins are going up in dollars, how do you know whether you're outperforming the market, so to speak? Well, you got to look at what your benchmark is, and if it's kind of your alt season oriented approach, alt ETH is kind of reasonable, as you mentioned.
Yeah, the first time I got wrecked in a bull market was thinking my Litecoin was doing okay in 2017. It was just like getting absolutely nuked relative to Bitcoin.
Oh, mate, up in USD. I don't think I'll ever forget those 3 words and the torturous debates that came with them.
It's an easy joke to make, but like, one, there's more USD pairs than ever. There's fewer BTC pairs than ever. And then 2, like, you got a whole new group of people that don't understand those correlations. Yes. And once they learn it, it'll become important. But the market will be over by then.
Once they understand, when they finally have a grip of it, that's when they'll have to wait a few years to make use of that knowledge.
It's just this could totally have another move, the BNB ETH setup. I just feel like from a sentiment perspective, what I've seen in the BSC landscape, like what's happening over there, the degree of like very resonant of DeFi summer, late DeFi summer stuff in the ETH landscape, it seems like the the projects are getting worse and worse over there. And I feel like there's at least decent potential that some of those flows start to go out, and it ends up kind of being distribution-ish relative to ETH at least.
Yeah. I mean, the market likes ETH right now, right? In the face of weakness, it was ETH that was bid more so than anything else. And I tend to agree that a lot of these other layer ones, their narratives seem to be quite stretched at this point. And also, I think it was just kind of a cocktail of bad luck and bad timing for ETH when fees were high and all these other layer ones were coming, no coincidence, coming out with their own so-called innovations and IDOs and other kind of weird throwback ETH knockoffs. Like, it was like the perfect storm, basically, right? ETH is expensive, all this new stuff comes out, all the new stuff on the new stuff is going up in value. Plus you have a ton of retail aping in as well, using blockchains that are affordable, right?
Tips on the Rift, I think, has a pretty good 50 IQ take here, where it's like, okay, BSC, nice run, and now okay, well, you have Phantom, Polygon, AVAX, Solana, and it's Solana season. Even if it's not Solana itself, like the BSC stuff that mooned, the Solana stuff within the ecosystem is like just getting its like foundations, so like if you're just looking purely on a rotation basis, well, maybe it's in those other layer ones, like go explore their ecosystems. Even though those coins, like those layer one coins, already went kind of nuts, those ecosystems are a bit behind, and maybe that's where the rotation goes.
Yeah, it's just a Russian doll of Ponzi's at that point, isn't it? It's like you open it up and a slightly smaller Ponzi, but part of the original one. Very fitting. I don't know. I could honestly see if for example, if Bitcoin breaks out and everyone's like, okay, any fears of prolonged consolidation, bear market, whatever, have been eradicated. I can see a world where after a small ETH BTC pullback on the Bitcoin breakout, you just get ETH continuation, and for a while that creates a vacuum for the other layer ones, right? Like, maybe I can go a week without seeing Pokemon on my Twitter feed. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I want that to happen, but I just don't trust myself that is what's going to happen. It's probably still how I'll play it, though.
Right.
Because my risk basis is not the same as other people's, and that's a big part of this too. Like, if ETH is such a good-looking trade overall, and you're like generally happy with what you can achieve in the ETH landscape, then you have a little bit less need to say, I'm going to go chase the next BSC landscape, where it's like, sure, you hear about every now and then some scam 100x's, but then like for every scam that 100x's, there's like 17 rug pulls,
Yeah, the returns become diminishing pretty quickly. It's like when all of crypto Twitter was like, oh, we're getting rug pulled by, TikTok is so much better than us and ahead of the curve. That was kind of the top for a lot of those projects, and sentiment-wise, generally, that aligned quite nicely with a cool down in that sector.
What do you think ETH BTC could retest to? Would you go all the way back to the weekly prior high, like the 0.043, or do you think that would actually be kind of bearish if it gets all the way back to that point?
That's kind of the furthest I would be comfortable with it going, to be honest with you. As you mentioned, 0.04, yeah, roughly thereabouts. Like the previous, like I don't want it trading back below any of its breakout levels, generally speaking. So this is decent, sort of 43, 45s, whatever. I don't want this to be kind of the final leg before it trades back below the breakout and then does whatever. Like one thing that ETH BTC isn't good for is you don't want to see it come back. Just like breakouts generally, the best breakouts, you don't want to see them come back. And if they do, you want it done very quickly, either immediately upon breaking out on like some lower time frame touch and go, or you want it to come back much, much later once it's already gone like a million X. Very scary in bull markets are breakouts which don't lead to anything or go anywhere. Those are the ones generally not worth sticking around for. So yeah, if that trade plays out, as in BTC up and breaks out, ETH in relative terms down a little bit, so ETH BTC down as well. I don't want to see it, at least on a higher time frame basis, losing any of its breakouts. And then if we have our full bull market goggles on, sort of macro continuation, big weekly candles of green, I can see a world in which ETH just keeps going. And again, this is kind of my 50 IQ play. It was strong when the market was weak. If the market's strong, I expect it to be even stronger. So we'll see how well that goes.
Yeah. People want us to chart Phantom. I literally don't even know what it is. I put it on my chart a couple weeks ago.
Oh, you did?
It's FTM USDT on Binance. It's been listed there for a while.
Is this a layer 1 type of deal?
I think it's Matic-ish, AVAX-ish.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Somebody says it's Andre related.
I mean, this is a decent example of, again, I know nothing about this project. It's just pure TA chicanery.
Yeah, look at these just massive candles.
Yeah, I know.
Where have I been?
How is this not on my radar, right? But
there was another one. Alpha did the same thing.
Yeah,
seven days of down, and then now it's just making all of those bottom sellers, relative bottom sellers, it's just totally seething. And I did this in Aave, by the way. I did the exact same thing in Aave. I sold the dead ass bottom of Aave.
I think this is a good example.
I at least put it back in ETH, but still, it's
did you puke Aave USD bottom?
Yes.
Ooh.
But I back to ETH because I thought ETH would outperform.
Okay, so that's not too bad actually.
But it didn't. It didn't outperform. It went half as fast on the way up.
Yeah, rotations are hard, man. Rotations are hard.
Yeah.
And again, it's almost a privilege to be in that position. Okay, where can I make the most money because everything's going up?
Act like those 4 massive green candles don't exist, and what's your general outlook on Aave there? It's like triple bottom at 300, and it triple bottoms don't exist. I just was like this. If this nukes, it's going to 200.
So Don, I had the same view as you, but Don was beating the Aave bullish drum
because he loves these ranges. He doesn't care about chart patterns. He doesn't care about doubles and triple bottoms.
For him,
he just loves ranges.
This is why I had the same view as you. I was like, Aave looks like whatever, but then his whole point was it's retesting the top side of its BTC pairs. So it's probably going to do pretty well. And I disagreed with him on 1 week at Moon, and then kind of forcibly agreed with him for the next week. So this can be good. I think we're seeing a slight renaissance of altcoin, even Bitcoin pairs when it comes to DeFi, because a lot of the early DeFi guys were big Bitcoin guys, as I'm sure you're aware, right?
Yeah.
So for them, it kind of makes sense because they're not leverage punting this for pennies, right? It doesn't make any sense for them to do. These are big portfolio rebalancing stuff from people who have a lot of Bitcoin. So it kind of makes sense to view in the appropriate context the altcoin or even DeFi Bitcoin pair just when you kind of know who are the players pushing size around, When I was rooting for Aave running the fibs on the USD pair, the the BTC relative support was a huge component of that at the beginning of the year. And you can't see it here very well, but it was when it was on Lend. When it was just called ETH Lend on Uniswap, it actually tested its roughly $100 high on the USD basis a couple of times, and the fibs were what took it to 500, and that was I just think it's going to break this high and run the fibs, that's exactly what it did, but then it just chopped around. But anyway, the BTC pair on Aave was also really close to some of the long-term moving averages that I like. So yeah, I think I am a believer in those BTC pairs still. For sure.
Even though some of these BTC pairs look pretty good, while the ETH pairs turned into trash.
Especially now, right? Recently, that'll be exaggerated.
Yeah. So if you're trying to look at 3 different things, here's what it was. So Aave had this long-term consolidation. And I apologize. I still can't share my screen with you. Long-term consolidation.
Which pair are you looking at? Sorry.
Aave BTC.
Okay.
And January 15th of 2021, it kind of broke up from that consolidation, and that was also a moving average flip against BTC, a 200-day moving average, which is kind of my barometer for a market in general. And when it broke that, it was the same time it was breaking those prior all-time highs at $100 versus USDT, and it was that kind of rare confluence where both pairs just break out in the most perfect way. And I was like, this thing's just going to mark up like crazy. And it just went absolutely nuts. And now it's got this kind of rounded bottom consolidation, never got back to the 200 really, if you're looking at that pair. So it still looks strong. But as an Aave, like if you're in Aave long term, you're also just in pain that whole time, like since February, because it's months of not being in other stuff.
Yes.
So
I mean, you can go tell that to YFI holders for some time, right?
yeah. It's like, how are you mad? You bought this thing when it was like $5,000. Now it's at 50, but you're like, yeah, but it was also 50 in September 2020.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the difficulty. This is kind of, if you want S&P-esque price action to some extent. I mean, obviously not perfect, but that model of higher highs being ultimately inconsequential until much later, this encapsulates that quite well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, compare this with sushi, right? A higher high in yen meant, or has meant, absolutely nothing. If you look at when sushi was the best to trade, like, any breakout was just like the most amazing entry or compounding opportunity ever. And I think with altcoins, this is the type of price action that works best. If it starts consolidating, like, play the range, sure, but holding those for too long when other stuff is trending is always a labor of love more than anything.
I've been trying to do some battle with Wi-Fi again.
Have you?
Yeah, but the reason is, once again, kind of like what we were talking about back then with Aave. I actually think the BTC pair might be telling us something with Wi-Fi this time. 20-day, 200-day, price is bouncing between them. The 200-day, this is the first time since it's existed that it would be able to clear it to the top side. And it's consolidating with higher lows, lower highs. Basically, if this the easy mode trade that I had highlighted is if it goes beyond 1 BTC per Wi-Fi, I think the easy trade is 1.5. Mm-hmm. So that's actually a quite nice trade all by itself. If you're trying to like preempt that, you're getting 0.86 to 0.9. Like, it's quite a discount if you're like buying ahead of time. The danger there is you end up sitting there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however long while you wait for that clearance. But I do think if it breaks above it, the 200 days at 0.92, 0.93.
Yeah.
So even that's maybe a 7% discount before it like truly clears one and goes off. And I think this BTC pair might be the clue for the USD pair properly breaking out. But I've been punished by Wi-Fi so many times.
I don't think you're the only one. It seems to be a trend with this coin.
Yeah, but I think that the signal there is like few enough people are going to be there. Like, it'll have been sent to such strong hands in that amount of time that like they will hold for 100K. You know, like it'll go to 100K. It'll go to more. Somebody in my chat, I think they called actually for like 2.8 BTC per Wi-Fi, which would be a full retest of like the world's ugliest head and shoulders / distribution, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think weekly market structure, I would really like some evidence of impulsiveness from there, because actually it's been really good in terms of how clear it's been. You just got low.
It was Jason from Telegram. Shout out Jason from Telegram. He has a Twitter now. Jason from TG on Twitter.
What a legend! Yeah, he was an excellent guest. Really good to listen to, and also accurate, which is perhaps most.
Yeah.
I can actually, if we're playing memes. Generally speaking, with I don't like fading weekly market structure. I want to be on its side. So some sort of higher high would be late but really good, and that would open up a lot.
That's that per 1 BTC per, right?
Yeah, roughly around there, and there's a lot of confluence there. But also, we just always play the memes that you have like some sort of support. If this is the overthrow, if we get a head and shoulders inverted on any type of dip, that would also be decent. But I'm going to be completely honest, dude. Recently, in the last year or so, I've become so much more comfortable buying high and selling higher rather than trying to preempt consolidations breaking out or playing the range high in anticipation and expansion, whatever. I've come to peace with trading in the middle of nowhere if other people want to buy it from me. You know what I mean?
It sounds like to me you're successfully sliding down the left side of the curve.
It really has been the case. Yeah.
I'm like hanging on like Tom Cruise and Cliffhanger, like just hanging on to that middle tier, and I just can't convince myself. You want to look at, and this is going to support your argument. Let's close the loop on how do we analyze these trades. You look at USD, you look at BTC, you look at ETH. Now look at Wi-Fi ETH. This is either the greatest like breakdown reclaim moon, or just like ready to get absolutely hosed, like make this all-time low versus ETH.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying.
Because we're bullish ETH, but like the daily lows from August 2020 on Wi-Fi are actually like 11 ETH per Wi-Fi basically. And if this fails, like this looks like a giant descending triangle. Like this looks like bear market charts.
Yes.
That then break down and like make everyone go into like severe, cuddle up in a ball positions. So if this goes down from 17 to 11, like the Wi-Fi pain will still exist. And like this is kind of that final test, right? Of if it can reclaim this, and I don't know what that level is, but it actually, maybe it's like 20
it looks
ETH
like
per Wi-Fi.
chart, yeah.
That's where it's like, just wait. I'm telling myself this, right? 17.75 right now. Just wait until it clears 20 and then play the 20 to 28 like trade. That's the kind of easy mode trade if we want to play that one. What will the USD pair be then? It should be in price discovery by then.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the third check on how am I going to play this trade. And do you agree with that process?
Maybe it'll go up a tick with every jab that Andre lands on Messi in Dubai. That's my kind of fundamental analysis. Yeah, I agree. It's both a blessing and a curse that we have so many pairs to look at when trying to gauge an altcoin. The Duck at least has made a fairly convincing case that the BTC pair is really good for Wi-Fi, more so than the USD pair. This is, at least for me, this is one of those where it's underperformed even when DeFi was like literally at its hottest. And there were some sort of fundamental hiccups, if you will, around that time. So it can be sort of explained. But that's kind of just one more hurdle to cross, right? I've got like a presumption of weakness that even in good conditions, this underperforms its peers. And therefore I need to set some sort of evidence or standard for it to prove that it can do better. So for me, like either daily or weekly, some sort of higher high, some sort of market structure break, like get out of this like moving average pinch that you mentioned. Like show me some signs of impulsiveness, and my 50 IQ has no issues buying high to sell higher. But I need,
you'll buy the 20% impulse because you think it's leading to 200% move.
Exactly, and I think that's something people miss out on a lot in bull markets. Like, yeah, you're buying like a 20% candle, but if you've got like a reasonable or maybe unreasonable, that might even be better, like an unreasonable expectation that it'll go up multiples of that, then your entry isn't really that important, right? I've always argued that the how tight your entry is should bear some sort of relationship with the move you're trying to capture. It's like if you're scalping Bitcoin playing these short-term rotations, you need to be precise. If you think this thing is going to be multiples higher in whatever period of time, then your job is almost getting an entry more so than where exactly it is, right? So I'd rather pay up once I have the trigger because I don't care, like pay for that conviction rather than, pay half up front hoping that the second half follows through,
Yeah, this kind of reminds me, if you remember, like April 2019 bear market altcoins with some hopium.
Oh,
it's kind of what Wi-Fi reminds me of versus ETH. Like, it's like, yeah, it's totally in a reverse. Everything's going to be great, and then you get like 2 weeks of upside, and then
that was really brutal. Won't be forgetting that in a while. But yeah, look, like this is the thing, right? You're spoiled for choice when the market's bullish. So why play coins that look weak and have more to prove rather than stuff that kind of goes up only and makes it difficult to lose money, right?
Yeah, I have to challenge myself. Like, CMS on his Twitter profile, do you want to be right or do you want to make money or whatever? Like, too often I want to be right. I obviously want to make money, but like my desire to be right or like to call for myself, like seek the entirety of the move, the breakout, whatever, like that. I think it too often ends up causing me to buy these anticipatory breakouts that then end up being like consolidation pains while like somebody else's coins are just going nuts. And a bit of hubris to not want to buy that 20% impulse. And today it's like FTM. Maybe this is the exact example.
Right.
Maybe I should be buying right now because it's up 34%. But you know what? I'm not going to do it.
Maybe I should now. Just because you said that.
But it's like, Okay, good. It just made a new high, 65 cents. Now it's at 77. It's about to go to an all-time high. Like any
$1 psychological
any
level.
yeah, any pea brains like $2 soon. And I'm like, screw you. I'm not buying up 35%. It's like I should be market buying right this moment.
Thing is, there is a kind of hidden benefit in the bell curve argument. Whereas if you're buying strength, a lot of the time your invalidation is clearer than if you're buying ambiguous conditions, right?
Yeah.
So with the YFI example, like let's say it's sort of at mid-range or near resistance, and then it makes its way to the range low or at support. Like, does that mean you're manifestly wrong on the idea? Like, not really, right? It just ends up being this gray area where you're less right than before, but it's not a good place in terms of EV or whatever to close the trade necessarily, because if it's going to bounce anywhere, it's there. Whereas a lot of the time, if you're buying these big candles, mega moon breakouts, whatever, you know pretty clearly that if this daily gets retraced, or these two dailies get retraced, you're almost certainly wrong. So you have like a really clear, so you have two things which you don't have on the other pairs, which is one, existing evidence of strength as opposed to waiting for it, and two, much clearer invalidation, which is closer to market and which leaves you with no doubts. I think that's why the 50 IQ plays are really clear a lot of the time, because the scope for disagreement is pretty narrow. But where it does exist, it's pretty clear where you're getting out and where things turn sour. Whereas if you're trading consolidations or stuff that isn't impulsive, the amount of mental gymnastics you can perform and, be wrong while still being right or vice versa, these are just more difficult trades. And I think if we're making the argument that this is retail, bull market continuation, TikTok, etc., I think it's kind of buy breakout season rather than reclaim this and all the stuff that we learnt in the bear market. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. I should be buying this right this second.
This is going to be the best performer by this time next week, and neither you nor I will have bought a single penny.
Well, no, I just actually looked it up, and I want to see, because this is one of the things that gets at me. I don't know how many times we can talk about our IQ in one show, but it might be hitting a record. I'm just coping. Why is this traded on Uniswap and stuff? Mm-hmm. If they are a layer one with their AMMs and all that stuff, and it's going to kill ETH or be the better whatever it is, why is the trading occurring on ETH dexes? That's what I don't understand. But I did just check, and it's fairly liquid on a dex, but it's not great. But I'm sure all the activities on Binance or somewhere.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's difficult to. Once it gets to places where people know how to trade, it's gonna. I think this is where the volume goes. I'd be interested to know how prevalent. If something starts off on Uniswap, right, and then makes its way over to a centralized exchange like a Binance, like a big one. I wonder what the kind of net impact on, how much volume does the centralized exchange take on that type of move. I'd imagine for a lot, it's a big chunk, right? If you have something on Uniswap that gets listed on a centralized exchange, that probably takes up the bulk of the trading.
I think it could end up being both. I'm not really sure what I would credit all of the market dynamics for creating liquidity on a DEX, but Sushi and Wi-Fi and Uni, I mean, you can buy extraordinary amounts for pretty low slippage on a DEX, but they're also very liquid on a centralized exchange. And there are other tokens where despite being large, it's just really hard to buy on a DEX. And a lot of it's liquidity incentives that they provide for holders and stuff. No matter what, if it's kind of a top tier token, though, you get it on the big centralized exchanges, FTX and Binance and stuff, they end up liquid enough to where you can enter and do what you want to do. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive necessarily, but some are definitely better than others in terms of on the DEX itself. Whereas on a centralized exchange, pretty much if it's not a total garbage coin, even if it takes you a bit, you can get in. And that's what's hard about an AMM is you can't chunk stuff very easily. Mm-hmm. If you're buying $10,000 at a time or $50,000 at a time or whatever your budget is, you're getting slipped. You're paying $50 to $100 for the transaction. It's pretty tough, and that eats into your potential trade profits. The ability to exit it can be a little harder. I still think it's a significant future, but I'm interested to see what Uni 3.0 does fundamentally to better enable DEX trading because it's pretty hard right now. And I'm still trying to do a decent amount of my trading on a DEX.
Is that partially out of principle or just to?
Well, no, partially because as an American, like some of these aren't available on the .us versions. Like I like FTX US, I like Blockfolio, obviously. Like Blockfolio for Americans doesn't have the options that like FTX International Blockfolio international customers can have. And that's just a sad state of the market for someone that's in America, you know? So the DEXs end up being a better place for me to buy stuff, even if it's not always very liquid and if it's more expensive. And, you know, thank you, American regulatory bodies, for making my life harder.
Yeah, just the cost of trading goes up significantly. It just becomes harder to be profitable. And also, I know this is far detached from the crypto Twitter canon, but in some version of the universe, leverage is actually used to reduce your counterparty risk, right? So you can trade the same positions as you normally would while not keeping as much money on exchange. Back in the day, that was a valid use case for leverage, whereas now, of course, it's just to crank it up and trade more size than you would otherwise. But that's also something you end up being deprived of if you're from a jurisdiction that's not terribly friendly towards these products, which is unfortunate.
Dan in your chat wants us to look at Link.
We can certainly take a look at Link. I think the Duck was talking about it. I don't know. I mean, the BTC pair really not much, to be honest. It's part, like the left side of the chart is kind of analogous. Well, analogous is not a word. Analogous to the discussion we had about sushi, where this is the type of stuff you want to trade. These conditions are really good, and when they change, it just becomes not as fun and not as attractive. Like when stuff moves from this to this, other stuff is entering this phase, and that's kind of more or less the rotations, at least for me, that you want to be looking for. While something's making trading it easy and trending, etc., at least for altcoins, I think that's where all the opportunity lies. And when it exhibits these shifts in behavior and starts chopping or distributing, ranging, whatever, I just think it's far less attractive, and also even, you know, somewhat more riskily, it's not as predictable as it was previously. I mean, the BTC pair is chop. I think the USD pair, if I remember correctly, is it all-time high grindy? Yeah, I mean that's what that is. Which is fine, but again, given we're in the bull market, you want your altcoins to be outperforming Bitcoin, to be outperforming ETH, or whatever your benchmark is. I haven't looked at the Link ETH chart, but that doesn't look like. I mean, yeah, it's looks good. Like a reversal. I don't know. It doesn't look strong. That's my first impression.
It looks like absolute trash. The the Link Marines, they used to love me. They screenshotted some tweet where I said like Link BTC, I think, was one of the most bullish charts I'd ever seen in my life.
Yeah, for sure.
And then Kobe responded to me something like, "That does look good." They used to screenshot that, and now I'm like, I think Link's realized its full potential as a project. And they're just like,
that's
like very angry.
It's a very risky one to go for. It's a very, but the insane part about Link is this: its strongest trend happened when the market was at its most shit, right?
Yeah.
And then when altcoins get to rip, that's when it started underperforming like ETH and BTC and DeFi, etc. Despite actually having very, you know, by virtue of being an oracle, and being widely used within DeFi, so all the stars were aligned for it to actually do very well relative to DeFi, from a narrative and fundamental standpoint, whatever. It kind of peaked in high school type of thing, right? That's sort of the chart that I'm seeing. Like,
well, I think it's like I'm too early on the relative trade on, like, when I talk about Solana and stuff. It'll probably go to 100, and you know, people will be making fun of me for the next 6 months. But
right.
Like, that's what happened on Link, right? Like that. Like by the time it was consensus, the only thing with momentum, there was no more momentum. Like, and that's what it was at the top. Like everybody was like, Link is just the Uber Chad and whatever. Aave did the same thing in February. It's like, it just went to 500, like 100, 500 in like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But when it reaches those climactic points, like tends to be it, especially on that relative basis until it's had plenty of time to chill. Link, on a relative basis, I think it might do quite a bit more than chill. And I'm not bearish on Link fundamentally. I'm bearish on Link in a momentum perspective. Because like you just showed, it just doesn't have the proof. And yeah, Link Marines already don't like me, so they can just add this to their group.
Add it to the long list. Yeah, I don't think they like the. I don't think I've got a reputation among the Link Marines. I know the Duck's been on and off because he buys it when it looks bullish and doesn't, and shorts it when it looks bearish. So that's unacceptable, obviously. At least the second part of that is. But yeah, I think, look, when you're spoiled for short, like, it's the same old thing. Even when you're trading well, you don't start like being more careful when you're on a heater, right? You turn it up because you never know how long these conditions are going to last. So you want to make the most of them and trade more, size up, or look at more markets, whatever. I think a similar logic can be applied to bull markets generally. If there's no shortage of charts which look insane, making higher highs, trending, looking bullish, moving quickly, jumping through market cap hoops, etc., there's no good reason to focus on the stuff that isn't. And I've always found the catch-up narrative to be slightly weird, and part of the reason is because you end up making the implicit agreement that this is strong and it's up, so I'm not going to buy it, and in case I'm going to buy something which isn't strong and isn't up, and relatively weak to the stuff that is. Which is, I don't know, it seems quite, like, contorted to me. Or at the very least, if I'm going to play, like, lagging stuff, I want it to show proof that it's going to stop lagging, right? Like a break in market structure or like a big green day when the market's red. I need to see some of that juice, some of that impulsiveness. Because otherwise, you end up in this weird world where you're playing the 2017 game of would you buy this? Stuff that's either going down, sideways, whatever, while everything else is ripping. It's like, well, no, I wouldn't buy it. Why would I buy that when, there are dozens of other coins with their own narratives and whatever else that are going up? So I think being picky in the bull market is something you can actually afford to do simply because all of the charts look so many of the charts look so good, Oh,
that's a good sentence. Being picky in a bull market is something that you can afford to do.
Right.
That's something that I think we could all.
So FTM.
Yeah, seriously. So Planet Street asked if we could talk about Cred's portfolio. So what does Cred trade?
Ooh, I think the stuff that I mentioned earlier on: Bitcoin, ETH, FTT, Solana, BNB is the overwhelming majority.
Kind of high momentum, high liquidity.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. There are some, like, within those, I'll do some kooky stuff, like go all in FTT for like a few months, which happened recently. That was really good. I felt, you know what, that fear that you mentioned, Ledger, that's what I felt like going all into a chart that looks like this, right? More or less on the break of this consolidation. So,
yeah, I think you're a psychopath.
Right. Part of me is like, what am I doing up here? There's no business to be done here, etc. But, opening the window to, drawing back the curtains to the 50 IQ life has certainly been enlightening. But it perhaps suggests that the end times are near if I'm the one doing it. But yeah, broadly speaking, big caps and stuff that I think will move with the big caps and maybe outperform if I'm feeling a bit more risky. But no, I'm not a huge mid-cap type of guy or shitcoiner. It's never, I've never been fully competent at that. So I play the bigger so-called blue chips and Cope as well.
Is it Cope the token?
Both. What about you? How does Rook? Is that a relic of the past? I saw Messi was getting messy about Rook. Actually, it didn't die, so that's...
No, it didn't die. I'm trying to... Where's my freaking chart?
Has the fundamental picture changed with sort of MEV mitigation type
No,
of...
I think so I didn't follow my plan on Rook, which was the bad part. Because I planned to get rid of my Rook when it had centralized exchange liquidity. Not that I would receive the liquidity, but that would be a moment for sell-off. It turned out that was the moment for sell-off. Nice. And I waited too long to do it.
You didn't want to crash the market. How benign and benevolent you are.
So my thing on a project like that is that it was like very right, but then like way too long and like following my earliest plan. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So like still end up making many multiples on it, but like missed many multiples waiting on it to like take the next leg.
Sure.
So for me, like I was buying Rook under $100, and got rid of it many multiples above that. But like one obviously didn't sell the top, which if I'd followed my plan, it would have actually sold the exact top.
Sure.
And then two, while it consolidated and went down, missed like stuff that I really wanted in, like the first leg of Matic from 11 cents or HNT Helium Network from $4. And like I watched those make multiples while my stuff went sideways. So that was pretty painful.
Yeah.
But it's not that I think it's dead. I think it's a good token, a good project. And I'm willing to go heavy on it again. I'm just not as heavy on it right now. Is all. But I don't want to get.
Speaking, are you Ethereum heavy at the moment?
Yes, I'm Ethereum heavy, and I want to outperform Ethereum, which is very hard to do. I still think ZRX will have like price exploration, and it actually got to it and then decided to fail completely.
How do you plan to outperform ETH? Is it via DeFi? Do you see that?
Yeah. By DeFi, and then taking some like trying to every now and then take like a rational long against ETH and kind of hedging if ETH beats DeFi. So maintaining DeFi exposure and then margin longing, very low leverage, small portions of my portfolio ETH to like try to capture in case it doesn't.
Your ETH leverage trade must have gone well, right? You mentioned, I think it was like a week ago, that you were taking your first leverage trade.
I was. It would have gone. It would have gone better if I didn't stop myself out and have to re-enter.
Okay.
So it still did okay, but like it failed my location where it was like kind of the pivot point. And so no, I didn't. It hadn't gone as well as it should have, but it's gone fine. Like it's the way I would phrase it, basically. And that was just one of those, like the process was right, the outcome was like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, the ZRX play, it had a weekly close into price exploration, and then it failed it, and then it had 2 weeks down, 1 week up. So it's just kind of sitting here in no man's land. Against ETH, this is failing my exactly my stated goal, though, right? Like I'm not outperforming ETH sitting in this while it's sideways. But I do still like it. Another one that I like is Curve, which this is one similar to what Aave showed, is like relative to BTC. I think it actually looks really ready for markup. And also sitting here just below all-time highs. If these don't go to all-time highs, like I'm going to sit here coping, like anticipating breakouts to all-time highs. So that's the risk. If they do break to all-time highs like I anticipate, then I'll probably have a period of weeks where I massively outperform the market. But so far, it's like depending on when I entered and exit, and I've kind of rolled in and out of some of these at times. But these are like the coins I like to select to choose, like how am I playing, how am I looking at. Sushi just decided to try to re-enter that today. My biggest win in a while from a percentage perspective was actually Lido, which is Kobe's coin. And that's got up to like $3 today, and I got that around $1. So I got multiples on that. Of course, I never talked about it until just now, so I'm clout farming it. But it was hardly even technical. They had like some good fundamental news that I FOMO'd in on. It's very illiquid, but this was it. All the
Chads investing, or was
that? Yeah. It was like 3 arrows and some other people that invested, and I was like, well, that's really cool, and jumped in. I'm looking at the Uniswap chart on it right now, which is not where it's most liquid, so it didn't do this on Sushi or wherever it is liquid. But you can't. It's a tough one to enter with size. Other than that, I've done some other stuff, but mostly trying to be pretty ETH heavy, and I'm not unsatisfied with that. So
No, it'd be difficult to. It'd be hard to complain, especially in these circumstances.
Yeah, I talked to Don on Weekly Open, like right back here when it had this tiny little weekly wick below 0.03. And I was like, I think that might have been the bottom. And I just assumed it was and waited. And then we got a nice week of cushion.
Yeah.
So ever since then, it's been able to kind of be my, like, all right, well, I feel like fairly safe just denominating in ETH while this stays above those levels. The big advantage I've had this year is that I haven't played the market poorly since February, but I played the market so well from a timing perspective. I went from basically being Bitcoin only to being DeFi only January like 2nd. And people were not convinced yet in January because Bitcoin was mooning, like super mooning. And I was like, I think this rotation is occurring. I think it's occurring at the beginning of the year. And then I just followed my plan on that. And I so massively outperformed the market that on a Bitcoin relative basis, I'm like way up. On an ETH relative basis, I'm way up. And that's while being an absolute piece of crap trader for the past 2 months. So like, I can't get mad about that because like my process was okay. It wasn't perfect, but like as a trader, swing investor, you're never going to like nail it, you know? And I just recognize, I've been around long enough to recognize, like I went through a couple month period where I made some tactical mistakes that I could have done better, but now's not the time to like give up my processes as a whole. Sure. So I'm still going to do my dumb stuff of like, all right, well, what's the like weekly macro telling me? What are my 200-day moving averages telling me? What are my checks when I go down the list of USD, BTC, ETH relative pairs? Do I think these can break out in a bull market? Am I going to anticipate the breakout? Yes, I am. It's not like you just talked about. It's smarter to play the impulse, and right. I mostly agree. But for some reason, I feel a better safety by anticipating some of those. So like, I hope I get these breakouts that I want, but if I'm not patient for when they occur, like on a ZRX, it'll move to $2 from $2 to $5 the moment I decide to bail on it. So like that's kind of how I'm playing it. Yeah. Anyway, no, I don't know if that answers the question. Like it's been I went from like totally euphoric mid-February as like the DeFi narrative essentially capped out like near-term potential to consistently like making the wrong move, even though I saw what the right move was, but I like refused to rotate properly. And when you pull the Band-Aid and decide you're going to like follow your process again, then like things recover, even if it just takes a little bit. So I'm hoping that I can get back to my market outperformance over the course of the summer. And I've been getting there. I've been making some relative gains in the portfolio finally, but it's, like I went through a 2-month dry spell and it hurt. Didn't feel good at all.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is, oddly enough, at least for new people, Twitter can be both a blessing and a curse. Because if you have even a reasonably eclectic list of people that you follow, everyone's winning, but also across different sectors, right? All you see is like a permanent highlight reel. So someone's made an amazing play on punks. This guy found an amazing farm. This guy got into this whatever pre-sale or listing. Then there's DeFi. Then these players are doing margin trades, etc., etc. Like it's really overwhelming when there's so much going on, and the only sort of thing you see are wins across all these different sectors. And if you're barely matching the index, that can certainly put you on a bit of a downer and make you chase things that you have no business chasing.
Yeah, you turn bad decisions into bad process.
Exactly, yeah. But being in the market, I think for most people at least, if this is your first cycle, certainly surviving in the market is going to be a huge win. And then outperforming the index or whatever benchmark you have. I mean, that's huge and also increasingly difficult the more things heat up. So as you very correctly, in my view, mentioned, like you shouldn't, if it's avoidable, sacrifice your process to chase those extra few percentage points that would get you over the index, over the benchmark, outperforming ETH, whatever. Because because there will come a time when we'll look back at this very fondly, specifically this period of time where, you know,
We'll say it was all easy, even though right now we just said it was hard.
Exactly. So that, you know, it's always worth keeping that in mind. And it's weird, right? You've got the best bull market kind of ever, but you've also got more opportunities to get wrecked on leverage than ever before as well. And the futures, open interest, and everything else, and volumes are higher than ever before, understandably. So it's this weird juxtaposition where what you need to do well, that threshold is very low, but the amount of ways in which you can get wrecked, I don't think has ever been higher between kind of leverage, all these farms, pools, IDOs, all these other versions of listings. I don't know. It's very, very, you know, temptation is everywhere in the Garden of Eden at this point.
Yeah.
You know?
And, you know, like as an example on the leverage front, I had not played leverage yet this year. Then I played it and was right within my risk tolerances that I set aside, yet manually stopped myself out because of like a small daily close below my level that mattered.
Yeah.
So I decided to like obey the process and manually stop out, even though I had not like percentage wise stopped out like from what I had to do. So like I still failed and it went up 25%.
Yeah.
Like I should be up a hilarious amount, and like it's up in USD gang, and I don't know if I'm back to even yet in ETH gang. You know, like that's absurd. That's absurd.
It is absurd, yeah.
And that's like low leverage, and like you see all these people playing extraordinarily high leverage, and I think what you're not missing is that $15 billion that blew people out. It blew people out, and there are people who lost everything that you don't see it, or like 1 in 10 you hear about it, but most just like quietly disappear.
I mean, the open interest tells the story, right? It's
that's
like
right.
The market's gone.
Yeah, and every now and then you'll see like loss porn. I don't like that word, but you know what I mean. Like where somebody's like, "Oh man, I lost $2 million today," and it's like, okay, well you're just flexing that you have like $10 million in your derivatives account.
Sure. Yeah,
you know, it's
absolutely.
like, okay, good job. Like I hope that those people survive in the long term, but like if you're playing that level of risk, if you're using the default margin on a platform of like 20x, likelihood not gonna make it. Yeah. So I'll take my slow and steady because I feel more confident that in the long term I'll be able to perform well enough in this market to accomplish the goals that I have in life.
Yeah, it's a very responsible adult mid-wit articulation of no, I agree. I always used to overstate or at least overrate the advice of just stick around and survive, learn day by day, etc. that really smart people were telling me in 2017. And now in 2021, it's abundantly clear to me that that's true. It's
amazing. It's amazing you think back about like fretting about everything, but in reality, it's like if Bitcoin didn't die, then down 70% is a pretty darn good place to accumulate.
yeah, for sure. And yeah, the asymmetry is always going to be to the upside, right? All those March kind of Chad calls, oh, I called the crash, etc., etc. Well, what followed? You know, you don't need to catch any, every single move on leverage or even any leverage to so-called outperform the crash by a large part. I mean, yeah, if you get liquidated, that's when things get a bit dicey. But generally speaking, survival as a priority has served people well, and I don't see any huge reason for that to change in the near future or just in the future generally. It's kind of the rule of markets, right? Time in the market, not timing the market, whatever trading wisdom is your preferred flavor. The way I like to think about it is almost like a very fitting, given crypto Twitter type of stuff, boxing analogy. You want to keep jabbing, you want to keep moving, and then once every while you land a haymaker, and that's enough. Just don't get knocked out.
Get knocked out.
That's yeah. That said, I'm just going to go on degen on leverage anyway. But I know what I'm doing, sort of. I convince myself I know what I'm doing, so that's good enough for me,
Yeah. I've been enjoyed being with you today, Cred. I'm going to have to go in here in just a second.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for making the time. I love these spontaneous meetups. We should do them more often and with perhaps less spontaneity.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it. Hope everybody has a great day.
Excellent. Thanks for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk, man.
See you, buddy.
Take care. Right, that was Ledger Status, my good friend Brian, host of Ledgercast and co-host of Up Only. Handsome, knowledgeable icon of our wonderful, little but ever-growing community. Go follow him at Ledger Status, Up Only TV. You all know the drill. As for me, that's also plenty from my side. You have the distinct displeasure of also listening to me on Monday, so that's back-to-back sessions. Hopefully you survive. So on the last Monday session, we had a little futures lesson where we talked about funding. If there's any interest, we can actually talk about open interest on Monday. What it means, how it's calculated, are there any signals that we can get from open interest following or diverging from price? I'm happy to go over that in a comfortable degree of accessible detail, whatever, on Monday. If that's something you want to see, make sure to like this video. Let me know in the comments. I'll happily consider your feedback. But yeah, that's all I've got for now. Thank you to Blockfolio for sponsoring Technical Roundup. Mobile trading app. If you want to get your family and friends to ape into crypto, I think Blockfolio is the best way to do it. That's certainly what I've done with my family members. If I get disowned, it's not Blockfolio's fault. It's just my awful portfolio management that's responsible for that. Otherwise, have a fantastic weekend. I will see you on Monday to talk about the weekly close, the monthly close, open interest, and all sorts of fun stuff. Thank you for sticking around. If you've made it this far, I will see you later. Bye-bye.